So you guys won't believe. Maybe you will believe. This is my third time trying to intro this podcast. But today we are joined by my brother, Skip. And since Skip is more guest than co-host on this episode, I feel like there's got to be at least a little bit of an intro. So I know Skip from the Comics Are Dope community. On Discord, they decided to call themselves the Dope Fiends. But I found out just through conversation that I've known Skip from the time I got into comics, just as a spectator, because I was reading House of X, Powers of 10 every week. And every week when that event or that series was coming out, I was going on YouTube just making sure that I was digesting what I read correctly. And so I would hear Skip giving his opinions every week on House of X on YouTube. So that was cool. Now, I don't know how Skip found the channel, and maybe that's something he'll have to talk about. But I noticed, like, Skip would comment, and especially once the Discord got started up, he'd jump in, he'd be giving recommendations. He's like spearheading the book club. He's boosting the server. I don't know what this term even means to this day. But Skip has always been like the big brother that I'd ever had in the hobby, who's like, hey, read this book, check out this writer, check out this artist, expand your taste buds a little bit, young blood. And so I've always appreciated the guidance. And today we're having a really interesting conversation about indie comics and why Skip loves them so much. But now that I've introduced him, welcome back to the show, my man, Skipntosh.
Yo, it's good to be back. You gave me that was a real intro. I felt like I might have needed like some intros music to go along with that, like some wrestling joints, like we know whose music that is. Oh no.
Right. Right. That is great.
I appreciate you, but nah, it all means a lot to me. I appreciate that. Yeah, man, comics just found a special place in my life, in my heart, and anyone that's come across me online, and took something positive away from it, that's as much as I could ask for. But I'll take converts too. I'm trying to convert people.
Word. Yeah, man, it's fun. Like you don't meet a lot of like kindred spirits in the real world all the time, right? You might meet somebody that you connect with on like a faith level, and so on, but it's rare that you meet someone in a hobby and you also sort of align in all these other ways. So it's been really cool to get to know you over these last couple of years.
Likewise, man. Appreciate you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it too. But we're gonna get right into it because my man Skip, he's got places to be.
I got beams to light, so let's get to it.
Listen, man, I'm just hoping we get to meet up in the second round. I don't know what LeBron's doing right now. Splitting the series in Sacramento without the best players on the team. Like, that's crazy.
I don't know, man.
Or Memphis, excuse me.
Memphis, yeah. Keep hoping. Keep hope alive, Kicks. Keep hope alive.
Yeah, man. I don't remember LeBron losing a first round series in quite some time. I would imagine he won't start now, but hey, we'll see. But anyway, so we're talking today about indie comics, why Skip loves them so much, what Skip's recommendations are, and what he finds in them. You guys know when I'm reading comics, I'm typically reading superhero books, because it's nostalgia. They're characters I'm familiar with from childhood, even like the licensed properties. Like one of my favorite books right now is Darkwing Duck, which I guess is technically an indie book. But, Skip really enjoys like the non-big two, and some big two stuff as well. But he's always putting me onto some lesser known series, some series that's critically acclaimed, but may not have like the commercial draw of other things. And for me, his taste is more eclectic. It's more of a diverse palette. And so now that I'm starting to try to venture out, I feel like I've seen some of the same tried and true tropes. I'm like, all right, if I'm gonna keep picking up these books every week, it's got to be something a little bit more interesting. And who better to have a conversation about that with than Skip? So I'm going to try to guide and focus this conversation as much as the two of us can be focused, right?
We'll do our
Um,
best. We'll do our
we'll do
best.
our best. But I'm really curious to know, like, what got you into indies? When did you get into indies? Was it always something that you were kind of like curious about? Or was there a point where you got maybe like fed up with big two stuff and was like, oh, let's try this out for a change?
It's like a two segment question. So
Mm,
I came along reading comics in the late '80s, early '90s, and I just so happened to be reading comics when Image became a thing. So Image
mm,
boomed. So I think indies for me feel a little bit more at home only because the Image boom was so big with Spawn and Shadowhawk and of course Wildcats and all of those different types, Cyberforce and all of those
mm,
different titles that were coming out that and they were equal quality, at least as far as visual aesthetic. And at that
mm,
time when I was younger, I definitely didn't have as many of the my palette and my knowledge for what's good writing, what's not, wasn't I didn't have quite that awareness. Things either resonated with me more or they didn't. So
mm.
yeah, man, like it was like I was into Spawn, I was into all that stuff. I would pick up those comics right with X-Men and everything else. And then as I got out of comics around 2001, and then got back into comics around 2012, 2011,
Mm.
2012. I got back more into the Cape stuff, and that stuff was good. But I remember going to LCS's, and I would see these books that I hadn't heard of, and with these color palettes and this line art leaping off the page, and I was just like, whoa, what's that? And I think again, going back to being raised with indies, especially Image Comics, I was like, oh yeah, what's this? And then I look down and I see that. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, Image. Like I kind of forgot about Image Comics. Like, and I just grabbed them. I didn't think nothing about it because I was familiar with it. And man, within the year, Image was my favorite comics publisher.
Word, word. So you got into Image basically early 2010s, or
So,
or
so
you
initially it would have been around the time that they came out. So I would say around
mm,
92, 93. I was into them
okay,
heavy by 94 for sure.
got you. So that's interesting because obviously early Image is still very much like capes. It's capes with an edge, but it's mostly superhero comics. And by the time you come to the 2010s, that's pretty much not what Image is, right?
Right.
The Walking Dead's a thing, Invincible's a thing, um but as far as I understand, because I wasn't necessarily there, Image had sort of become more of what it is now, where Image is, it's almost like a boutique or like a buffet. Like there's a little bit of everything at Image. And even as of late, there's not a ton of superhero stuff. There's Spawn, Savage Dragon comes out whenever it wants to. I guess the biggest thing we've got as far as superheroes from Image is the Massive Verse, which started about 2 years ago. So what was it about Image in that time period that really got you hooked? Because to me, those are like two different companies, Image in the 90s and Image then.
I would say in the 90s, it was definitely the art because that's what, the original six, seven, Will
Mm,
Spartasio and Jim Lee and Tom McFarlane and Jim Valentino and Eric Larson and I don't want to forget a Mark
Sylvester.
Silvestri. Yeah, dang, I still feel like I'm forgetting some, but that's everybody. Oh, of course, can't forget the live wire, the crazy one himself, Liefeld, Rob Liefeld.
Liefeld.
So known for the visual aesthetic, I'm big into visual aesthetic. I'm a kid. It's a visual medium. Boom. Give me the muscles. Give me the guns. Give me the swords, or the sharp edges. But here's the interesting thing. So the visual aesthetic is the big draw of Image in the
Mm,
'90s.
right.
Aside from the speculator boom that was going on, we don't need to talk about that. That's a whole other that's a whole other
Right.
issue. That's a whole other episode. But then as I come back into it, notice I said I was at the LCS and I looked and I saw all these color palettes and all this line art popping off the page. So it was still the art that attracted me to it initially. Like this, I did see that the stories weren't cape stories, and I think there was an attraction there. I'm a child of the late '80s, early '90s, so B movies was a very normal thing for me. These
Mm,
wacky, weird, off the beaten path type stories, that aren't as popular, but people still have
right.
enough passion to produce and release, via VHS or whatever. So I was already open to the idea of the stories. The imprint itself, the image eye, burned its place in my brain when I was younger.
Right.
And then again, now it's so for before they had more, I don't want to say they had more of a house style. They broke away from the house style, but their aesthetic became the style. So to me, I think like, oh, Image was the style in the '90s. But
Right.
now as I'm looking, they have more of a different style. They stand out from the big two art in a different way, this time via uniqueness and
Yeah.
variety. So really, man, it started with the art when I was younger. And what brought me back around to them when I got older, when I was in my, mid 20s, was the art.
Got you. Got
But
you.
what kept me there is another story. We'll get there, I'm sure.
Okay. Okay. So, the art got you. Now, so it sounds like it's not so much you're trying to break away from big two stuff. It was just that the image stuff was just attractive to you. Am I right there?
Yeah, it was just a natural attraction. Like when it first started, I wasn't looking to necessarily break away from capes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, oddly enough, it was right around that time where I kind of hit a little bit of the wall, if you will, or the realization of the comic cycle, especially the capes comic cycle.
Mm-hmm.
After you cycle for about 3 years, sure as day, like you said, the stories are going to get a little more repetitive, and the
Mm-hmm.
beats are going to get a little more repetitive, and they're gonna give this to the character, then they're gonna take that away from the character, then they're gonna give it back to the character, and like the way that comics cycle now. Sure enough, as the post that we had in our Discord about Ron Ma, it was initially it was Doc Shaner talking about he
Mm-hmm.
had a little bit of fatigue, and then Ron Mars replies and talks about how the comic cycles used to be longer and the
Mm-hmm.
audience used to be younger. Now the comic cycles are quicker and the audience is older and got more disposable income. I just started seeing those signs, man. And again, even at the time, I don't want to say I grew a disdain, but I'm a pattern recognition person, and I keyed in on that
Mm-hmm.
pattern, and naturally it just started to not be as interesting to me, these capes books at the time.
Got you. Yeah, it's funny. I, I won't say I'm there, but I'm at the point right now where it's like, okay, we're coming on like the third cycle, right? What got me into X-Men was the House of X and like the beginning of the whole Krakoa era. I'm here on my third X-Men event, and I'm like, all right, this isn't doing it for me. I know that in the last issue there will be some world changing thing that I'll need to pay attention to, but I'm not enjoying the ride necessarily. And pick a character we can kind of point out issues with each one if we need to, but there's not really a need. This isn't like to bash anything, but like you said, there are patterns. I'm starting to recognize those patterns, and that's what's kind of got me hungry for some different things. I guess the difference is superheroes are my comfort zone, mainstream big two superheroes specifically. But you said that the art got you there, but other things kept you there. What are those other things?
The other things, and I don't want to say it wasn't the art because there's still plenty of good art to go around on the
Mm-hmm.
indie scene, be it Image or Boom or whoever. But the the thing that kept me there was the stories and the
Mm,
voices, even still to this day. And I feel like as it should be to a degree. The big two, they have their brands, and within the brand, a part of the brand identity, or a part of what allows humans to key in on a brand's identity, is consistency. And that could be art
mm,
styles, it could be stories, it could be, team ups, it could be, event cycles, whatever. Um, you know, but within that, it does dull some uniqueness,
mm,
and these days, just due to the nature of the comics industry, a lot of creators are more keen on sharing their more passionate, unique ideas in a space where they can also maintain the rights to the characters and the rights to the stories, and reap the benefits
mm,
of those things. So what I noticed just over time, was, okay, hey, there's more unique voices here. They can take risks and do things their way, and not always have to worry about the monthly cycle, and the even the ongoing comics cycle, which I think there's a beauty to ongoing comics, but I found the beauty in stories that have endings and that have darn good ones. So, just within all of that, the uniqueness, the voices, the variety, the different genres that I can get into. I like to hold a space for comics, and respect to comics, and not always be like, oh, well, TV's better or movies better. But I did
mm.
relate it to how the variety that I had with like indie movies,
Mm.
and movies, as a whole. So that's really what I picked up on indies, is just that people were more unique there, and they, more often than not, they seem to be putting their best foot forward artistically, as far as visually and storytelling on the indie side.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the model of indie comics, right? Because most indie comics that we consume are creator owned, meaning the creators got skin in the game. If the comic doesn't sell well, not only do they maybe not get to complete their story, but they might lose money, right? And so, you're putting your best foot forward just like you would at your job because you don't want to get fired, right?
Yeah, straight up.
Um, but so yeah, I've noticed that as well. Whereas a lot of times with big two superheroes, it's a licensed property. Uh, a lot of times the story is dictated to you. Like they call you because you can write a certain type of story, and they may even have an ending in mind. I've gotten the pleasure of interviewing a few creators, and there's a lot of times where they're like, well, yeah, DC told me I had to end it like this. And they're just asking me, okay, how are we going to get to point B? And, on the other side of that, when we have conversations about indie comics, I'm like, oh, how this idea come about? And it's like, yeah, well, I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if such and such? And then I called my homie that draws, and he's like, oh yeah, I could do that. And we had this great back and forth and blah blah blah. And there's such a different creation process. Um, and it seems like, I believe to a degree, all comics are a labor of love, but indie comics seem to be more so a labor of love. And I think it shows in the final product for sure.
Yeah, man, big time. It's felt, and you feel the effort, you feel the inspiration. Like you said, that they they're putting a lot on the line,
Mm,
to make those books, with no guarantees outside of whatever is contracted, whatever they agree to within an agreement. They're outside of that, they don't know how it's going to go, and truth be told, I'm sure there's some that have regretted the time and being like, man, I probably should have just taken that Marvel project that had a better page rate, because I only got to issue 4 with this. I would at least probably gotten to a second trade with the other one, so all those
right.
things are there, and when they execute well, and it is up to that par, that's why I go the extra mile to support those creators. Like, if I want more of what they do, then I gotta, to a certain degree, it's on me to support that, and to ensure that I get more of it, to the best of my ability.
For sure. For sure. One thing I'll say though, with superheroes, I kind of know what I'm getting, right? When I'm looking at the indie section in the store, It's very much like standing in the middle of a blockbuster in the 90s. And it's just like, I don't know, like maybe I'm in the mood for a comedy. And then it's just like, okay, I'm just gonna read the back of all these DVDs until I find one that sounds all right, cool. This will be my entertainment for the evening. How do you go about choosing what series you're gonna read when there is so much variety?
That's a good question. Um, I'm gonna answer that, and then I'm gonna give a little cheat code for
Okay.
people to make it easier than I found out. So for me, it was definitely a journey. Um, of honestly, I would just be bold and things I would just like have to trust myself and my instincts. I asked myself, okay, well, what do I like? Okay, well, I like stories that have like unconventional endings or not the typical ending.
Mm,
Okay, so that's an easier sell for me. So I read the premise and then I look at the art and I try to read like a few pages of the dialogue just to see how smooth it is. That's kind of really where I started. From there, I stuck with outside of capes, I just thought of entertainment as a whole, and I stuck with the types of stories and the genres that I liked. I liked noir
mm,
type stories. I like stories like L.A. Confidential and just like noir type stuff, old stuff. With the femme fatale and then the
mm.
man of action. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm into that type of stuff. I know I like comedy. So okay, I can get comedic books that, and those ones you really got to read to see, how it
Yeah.
flows. And then, I knew I liked science fiction, so it was just different stuff like that. And then over time, I learned to trust my voice, but all that to say that took me a little while. But what I came to found out, and what became a cheat code, is actually just from the Capes comics. If I read a Capes comic and I really like the series, and I'm like, oh, I like this story. I wonder if this writer has any indie work out. And then you could
Mm,
just look for their indie work. Because if you already like their voice that they're telling in the big two, it's not a guarantee that you'll like their indie stuff, but chances are you'll probably be
yeah.
fairly into it. And then the same thing with artists. Like, oh, this artist is really cool. I wonder like what they did before they got this. Oh, they did a book on Boom. Let me go check that out. So that's the cheat code that I found.
Got you. Got you. Yeah. I don't know why I used the blockbuster analogy when Netflix was right there. Like, cause we've all sat there just scrolling on Netflix for hours.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh, this genre seems cool. I'll look at that, and then you just end up picking nothing. Or you settle for the same thing. Oh, I guess I'll watch The Big Bang Theory again, or whatever.
Right.
Right. Um. Well, yeah, but no, that's a fire cheat code because it's true. Like I find that if I like a writer, I'm more willing to give their book a shot. Um, the one example that I can think of with that is Tom Taylor, right?
Hmm.
I got into DC Comics reading Deceased.
Hmm.
And so when Seven Secrets came out, the shop owner's like, yo, you read Tom Taylor, you should probably pick this up. I picked it up, loved it. And so that's a thing. But I think now it's a little bit easier also because all the comics creators are on social media. They're all hobnobbing with each other. So it's like if you like one, you can kind of see who they're like buddy buddy with
Yep.
on Instagram or Twitter or whatever. Check out some of their stuff too. Um, I guess the risk you run is just your collection sort of being homogenized, like everything sort of being the same. And I think that's where you got to be kind of like Skip and just, trust your instincts, just go out, just grab stuff sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, man. So what I will ask, what are some of those series that really stuck out to you as you were kind of venturing into these non-big two books? What were the things that resonated with you?
Oh man, there was Paper Girls.
Mm,
That had just gotten collected um, around the time I was getting like back in the image. So Paper Girls, Tokyo. That was by Brian K. Vaughan,
mm,
Rick Remenders, Tokyo Ghost. I like cyberpunk. I like Asian culture and stuff. I did martial arts for years, so all that stuff was right up my alley, and it was noir, awesome art. Sean Gordon Murphy. Um, man, of course, East of West. East of West
Hmm.
had been going for a few years at that point, and that's my favorite comic series of all
Hmm.
time. So that was a big one that kept me into it. And then from there, yeah, just went around. Like I'm like, okay, I like this Rick Remender guy. Okay, so I'll check out Black Science, and I'm like, okay, I
Hmm.
like this Jonathan Hickman guy, so I check out Black Monday Murders. When that comes
Hmm.
out, and it just kind of went from there. And like once I started going down that route, then I was just open for anything. And another big thing that I would do, because I'd set my comic budget, and then if I had any money left over, I'm thinking about supporting the comic shop. So I'd just go whatever shop I was in. I'd go to the owner. I'd be like, "Hey, what are the top books that you're reading right now on the indie side of things?" And
Hmm.
sometimes I would say indie, sometimes I wouldn't, but more often than not, I would say indie. And then they would be like, "Oh, okay, have you seen this book? Is out by Mad Cave?" Or "Hey, have you seen this title? It's coming through Dark Horse." And then that started opening me up to the other different indie publishers as well. And then I start to find out, like, as a publisher, who tends to make stories that I orbit around, I gravitate towards.
Got you. Got you. Um, okay. I'm surprised. I'm surprised Criminal didn't make this list. Um,
I mean,
but
Criminal was up there, but truth be told, like Criminal, it's weird because I started with Criminal 2019.
mm,
And yeah, it is up there. It's so funny. It's just like I think it's just such a staple to me. But the thing
right.
was, Criminal. Like I read the 2019 one, and then it was over, and then I went back and I binged like all the old ones, and like really
Got you.
started digging into it. So Criminal was one that stuck out, but I don't know. Like I feel like I burned through it so fast. Like I
Hmm.
got more out of it when I was done with what was current than
Hmm.
like the back issues and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, Ed Brubaker is, if not the best writer in comics, one of the best writers in comics. So yeah, for sure.
For sure. For sure. I read Ed Brubaker's Captain America, at least the first volume,
Hmm.
fairly early in my comics journey.
Hmm.
Um, Collected the Criminal stuff, but never really read it. I got into Brubaker through Reckless
Yep.
because Skip relentlessly was like, "Hey, you need to read Reckless. Like, buy Reckless, read Reckless." And so I grabbed a couple of volumes, and it's funny because it hit a nerve that I didn't really know or realize I had. But Reckless is it's like, I don't know, it reminds me of like being at like my great aunt's house. She doesn't have cable, so we're watching like Magnum PI or Knight Rider or Matlock or any of those things like that, where you got the one guy who's gonna solve the mystery, but he's gonna get beat up a little bit.
Yeah.
Walker, Texas Ranger, all of those is what Reckless sort of reminds me of, even though it's not the same thing. And then I'm like, oh snap, I like these little private investigator dramas, and it's funny we're getting something similar to that with Ram V's Detective Comics right now with Jim Gordon. But yeah, so it's funny how like you read something like, to your point, and you're like, oh wait, I like this. Let me go find more of this. Let me find more of these private eye noir type books. Um,
Yes,
so
sir.
okay, so those are books that resonated with you, that stood out to you. Um, One thing that I feel like I really want to touch on is just sort of the heart of these indie books. So there's a lot of series that you've championed over, the last couple of years. What are some recommendations that you have for people? I know, like, I've heard you speak of the many deaths of Layla Starr. We all read Four Kids Walk Into a Bank together. But I'm curious to get like, some more skips. Like, let's call it a top five.
Top five. Top five. Yeah, I'll definitely put the mini deaths of Layla Starr on there. As you were talking about it, I look over and I have like two of the trades like
Okay.
to my right. Um, I would say East of West, just due to where television is right now and ensemble cast, between the
Hmm.
art and the writing, and the plot and how it concludes. Just a fantastic series to take yourself through. Um, I will. It's hard not to mention an Ed Brubaker book. I'll go with The Fade Out. That's my favorite Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips series.
Okay.
That one's a really good one. East of West, I talked a little bit about how it was like an ensemble cast. It's like half Western, half cyberpunk story, and it deals with the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They came back for to start the apocalypse, but one horseman betrays the other three, and the reason is like the perfect reason, and the fallout is deliciously messy. The Many Deaths of Layla Starr is about the goddess of death being demoted because a child will come up with the key to immortality. Since she's demoted, she's cast down into a human body, and she has to now learn about the importance of life. But she's mortal, so she dies. So she learns about it through death. So
Gotcha.
that's a bit very fantastic premise, beautiful story. I said The Fade Out. The Fade Out is about a writer in old Tinseltown, Hollywood, who wakes up after another one of those Tinseltown parties, and the new starlet for the studio that he writes for is dead, and he doesn't know how she died, and he's the only person that he woke that was in the room, and he doesn't even know if he killed her, and he's trying to find out for the sake of himself and for her, because he worked with her. He actually really respected her and stuff like that. So that story is super interesting. The other two, I'm going to say Murder Falcon by Daniel Warren Johnson, just because if you're listening to this, you have a heart. And if you read that, you're not going to be able to stop Daniel Warren Johnson from touching it. It's about a musician who we find out went through something traumatic. I won't say what it is, but all you know at this point is he's broken up with his bandmates, and he's distant, and he lacks harmony in his life. And he's in the middle of the city, and there's just some crazy, weird kaiju beast attack. And within the attack, here comes this creature, and starts to fight the monster, and tells the lead character, like, hey, you got to grab that guitar, you got to play. I'm powered by music. So he has to get over his trauma and his fear in the moment, and begin to play music again in order to save his world. And it gets a lot deeper than that because it's Daniel Warren Johnson. Lastly, man, which one I could you know what? Yeah, I'll throw a really good. I'll throw a lighthearted, funny one at y'all. I'll do the Six Sidekicks of Trigger Keaton. If you haven't heard of this comic before, it is one of the funniest comics you will have ever read. And to the point that Kick said earlier, if you grew up watching the old TV serials like Kung Fu or Walker Texas Ranger, like Kick's mentioned, and you ever heard about some of those stars having like a really bad ego and being hard to work with, this is a story about that tough SOB being hard to work with, but him getting killed, and his old sidekicks from all his old shows start coming together, and they start to try to unravel the mystery of who might have killed Trigger Keaton. And it's full on comedy.
Wow. That's funny.
Yeah.
That's crazy. As you're talking, it's funny. I'm trying hard not to retread old ground, right? We had a conversation in issue 2 of the podcast. We were talking about like, what makes a comic good. And I'm hearing some of those themes over again, right? Like we both love a comic with a lot of heart, right? It makes us feel something when we're done reading it. And so a lot of those recommendations, I'm hearing that in your recommendations. But it just, this world of indie comics that I'm slowly being opened up to, I'm realizing it's the difference between a comic book hobby and like being a comic book enthusiast or connoisseur. Like that's the difference. Like I'll take my wine with dinner, or hey, I love this one because it's got the grapes from this region, and I can taste the wood in the barrel, and
Yeah.
it's like, yo, what? I don't know what you're talking about, but sure, I'll try it. Right?
You're
That
wide,
that's
you're broadening your palate. You're talking about your
right.
palate, man. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's it. While it can feel intimidating at times, um, and I don't know that this conversation really made that less so. It does make me more excited to jump in to explore, especially as, again, we're on this backdrop where Capes comics are. It's not that so much that they're played, but it's like you starting to see the wires a little bit. You know, you're starting to see how the sausage is made, and you can get jaded with it. But for me, with comics as my entertainment drug of choice, it's been fun to find different series that scratch a different type of itch. So I guess I'll recommend some of my favorite indies that I've read so far. Um, I always got to go back and look at the shelf, right? So Firepower by Robert Kirkman. It's it's a kung fu book. I always uh compare it to like Avatar: The Last Airbender,
Mm.
even though I've never watched Avatar: The Last Airbender. Uh, I've seen like a couple episodes, and that's what it reminds me of.
Hmm.
But it's cool. It's this kid who was adopted, and he's on this quest to find his birth parents, who he knows were kung fu masters of some sort. He gets trained by like every kung fu master ever on this quest to eventually find his parents or find out more about himself. And boy, does he find out a lot more than maybe he wanted to find out. Um,
Mm.
he stumbles on this temple of these guys trying to perfect the firepower, this ancient art, which is basically fire bending from Avatar, right? And maybe that's where I keep drawing this comparison. Um, and you know, he's that the sort of trope guy, like the guy who's just naturally gifted at everything, like comes in and is just he's Michael J. Fox in Teen Wolf, like you know, he's untouchable. He's the chosen one. Um, but you know, that life takes him down a path he doesn't necessarily enjoy. He tries to settle down, have a family. And basically, 20 years later, everything comes back to bite him. Everything comes back into his life in a major way. Love that series. It's only 24 issues in, and it's still ongoing by Robert Kirkman with art by Chris Samnee, who absolutely steals the show. The art steals the show. The coloring as well.
Yeah. Shout out
Um,
to the homie Matt Wilson on the colors. That's my guy.
yes. So that's one. Skyward. Skyward is one of those series that to me doesn't quite stick the landing as well as I would have hoped it would. But this is this world where gravity just turns off one day. And our character is a young lead. And basically in the event that, you know, turn gravity off, her mom is killed and her dad is traumatized, and so she's the only one who's really adjusted to this world, you know, where you basically can live in the sky. I love different things where it's inverse of our world in a lot of ways, right? Like the rich people, they don't live in the penthouse; they live closer to the ground, and like that's like the sign of success and stuff like that. But anyway, she's got to sort of uncover this conspiracy to uh, control the world's resources while trying to maybe turn gravity back on. Like I said, I feel like it doesn't really stick the landing, but it's a fun 15 issues. The art and colors are great in that as well.
That's a heck of a pun there.
Uh,
It doesn't stick the landing.
and that was not intentional at all.
You're a poet and you didn't know
Um,
it.
right. Um, and you know what's crazy? There are indies that I've read, but I don't have collected in hardcover, so they slip in my mind. Right now, as far as licensed properties are concerned, I am loving Darkwing Duck from Dynamite Entertainment.
Nice.
It is, it's everything you remember about Darkwing Duck, and it's there. Reckless, Brubaker, Sean Phillips. I talked about it already, but again, if you grew up Like Skip said, watching those TV serials where it's like you don't need to like be on episode 4 and then watch episode 5. Like it's whatever. Just sit down and be entertained. That's what Reckless is. I will say Reckless sort of tap dances on the edge of my PG to PG-13 sensibilities. Like it definitely ventures into rated R at times, but it's not gratuitous. So,
Correct.
so it works, but just be warned. I know typically I try to keep things super family friendly, so I don't want anybody picking up a book on my recommendation just off of my good name, and then got to explain stuff to little kids. So
Hey
that's
Timmy,
that.
how'd you like Reckless?
I hope Timmy doesn't read Reckless. And that's probably where I'll stop on indies. What I find is that I can read indies just fine, but they tend to end. They have endings, and so I find that for me, it's better to just grab them in trade as opposed to grabbing them off the shelf in periodical format. How would you agree? How do you typically digest them?
I give myself a little bit of room there. So if it's creators that I know and I love, then I'm almost always grabbing the floppies
Okay.
because I just know that matters to the publisher. So
Gotcha.
so I'm grabbing the floppies. If I love it that much, if they really stuck the landing and all that good stuff, I'm buying the trade too. Like I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna get it in just about every iteration. If it's an indie story that sounds good, or at least sounds interesting, but not by a creator I'm familiar with, or or if the comics budget's a little tight, I'll definitely allow it to go to trade. That's just fine. But I'm also a big digital reader, so if it happens to be from Image Comics, it's not uncommon for me to go ahead and just wait the 30 days until it gets they will do a 50% discount on most books after 30 days. So if the book is a month old, instead of paying your $3.99, you can pay $1.99. If you got Comixology, you pay your $1.79, and I
Yeah.
get the book like that. So, I definitely work every angle. Of course, I'll keep an eye on in stock trades. We know to do that. We know organic price books. If it's going to be a bigger book or something like that, big old collected edition, Omni, anything like that. So yeah, I give myself some angles to work when it comes to the indies. But if it's like Ice Cream Man, my favorite current indie ongoing, like I'm getting every floppy. I'm getting like all the variants. Yeah, I'm getting at it like that.
Word. It's funny. I'm scrolling through my Comixology now and just remembering all these different series. I'm like, oh snap, I forgot I read that, but that was dope. And funny enough, I just took advantage of that Image deal. I grabbed No One #1 for $1.79 earlier today.
Right on.
But Bitter Root from Image Comics, I love it. It's basically it's this family of monster hunters living in Harlem, and the series is set between like Harlem and South Carolina. They're hunting these monsters, and the monsters are like physical manifestations of racism and people being controlled by their most base instincts and stuff. And every time I explain the premise, it sounds preachy, but the way it's executed is just so good, honestly. And then let's see, another one that I'll recommend, Public Domain by Chip Zdarsky. I've read the entire 5 issues. It is very much a commentary on the comic book industry and how it's morphed into the entertainment industry and how creators very much get left behind, even as pop culture becomes like, this massive multi-billion-dollar franchise and industry. And then this one, I don't even know if it counts as an indie. Well, it's not a big 2 book, but Neverlanders is a young adult graphic novel written by Tom Taylor with art by John. I'm going to butcher his last name, but oh, no, maybe not. Samariva.
Okay.
But it's a story. It's it's a cool twist on the Peter Pan story. But I like books with young leads. And so this young lady named B leads a found family on this excursion through Neverland, basically. And it's really dope. The art's really good. Only knock that I have is the book it's a young reader book, so it's small. It kind of telegraphs its moves, but you enjoy it either way. Or I enjoyed it still. Mostly because of the art. But it's really well paced as well. So look, I'm trying to be respectful of my brother's time here. We've got you a bunch of recommendations to get started with. I guess the moral to this episode is if you've been afraid to try indie comics, don't be. There is something for literally everyone. If you're into horror, there's horror. If you're into detective stories, there's plenty of those. If you're into slice of life, you just want to see people, playing The Sims, they got that too. There's even books about people that play tabletop games. Like there's so many different stories and different types of stories. No matter what you like, you can probably find a comic for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, comics that comment on comics are some of my favorite. I'm reading a story right now that's literally about a writer who's a fraud, but went into the creative world and they thought he was a good writer, a different writer, and they follow him wholeheartedly. And they're following a fraud. Like it's like it
sounds like the plot to A Bug's Life.
There you go. You uncorked it. Exposed. But no, I love comics. And I think one of the biggest things that I found out, and I think other people will find out, is, you may be a capes lover, but if you get into some indies, I think you'll begin to find out that you're not just a capes lover, that you're a whole comic book lover. Like there's romance comics out there that I've read. There's war comics out there. We talked about the noir. We talked about the mystery. We talked about the sci-fi. There's literary comics out there. There's documentary comics out there, biographical. There's so many different types of stories, historical stories, so many different types of things. I think you will be surprised to find out that you don't just love superheroes, that you love comics as a whole. So that's the question. Do you just love capes comics, which is nothing wrong with that? Or maybe you love comics as a whole? Go find that out. Come back. Let us know what you found.
For sure. So I'm going to give you guys some homework. If you've been looking to venture into indie comics, obviously you don't want to go spending a ton of money. What I would recommend, go to Comixology.com and try out their Comixology Unlimited service. Comixology, obviously owned by Amazon, they do a good job of collecting at least the first 3 to 4 issues of a ton of different indie series. Amazon will get you though. There's almost always going to be an issue or two that you'll have to buy if you want the full story. But that's a great way because you can sort them by publisher, so you can just look at the Image Comics or the Boom Comics or whatever. If you pay I think it's either $7.99 or $8.99 a month for Comixology Unlimited, you can borrow up to 50 titles at a time, read them on your phone or your tablet or what have you. You pay that $7, you'll get your money's worth in the 30 days that you have it. And you can decide if you want to keep going. I use that a lot to catch up on or to try out indie series that everybody lauds and says are great, but that I never heard of. And I save a lot of money that way. So that'd be my recommendation to you. But look, man, I appreciate you, Skip, for taking time to walk me through this indie comics landscape, but also for our listeners. And I thank you guys who are listening, whether you're watching this on YouTube. I don't think this one will be on YouTube. But however you find out about the podcast, I appreciate you listening, sharing. I guess I'll do the podcast host thing and ask you to leave a rating, a review in Spotify or iTunes or wherever you're listening to this. It'll just help us get seen or heard a little bit more. And until next time, man, thank you so much for listening. I hope you're Stay awesome. Hope you're enjoying yourself. And I hope you're reading something dope. Peace.